This is Ian Hartley.
I am Warren Kay.
And I am Sasha Steenbergen.
Welcome to the Rediscovering God Dialogue.
We invite you to join us as we endeavor to see Him more clearly
And love Him more dearly while following Him more nearly. As we continue on this journey in Genesis, last podcast we ended with the verse, at that time people first began to worship the Lord by name, and we talked about that. And then chapter 5 looks at the descendants of Adam. So we covered in the previous one the descendants of Cain, and now we go back to the descendants of Adam through Seth, who was the next child born after Abel, who Cain had killed. And so that's where we pick up today. Ian?
Yeah, this is a boring chapter about genealogies, but there's lots of interesting information in it. So we'll read a few verses and talk about them but we're going to skip most of the verses because they just beget verses. They're the kind of, if you can't sleep, you take Genesis chapter 5 and read it, and you'll be asleep in no time.
Perfect.
Just goes on and on about who begat who. So Sasha, why don't you read verse 1?
Good. This is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, He made them to be like Himself.
So this is a really interesting question to ask. In what way are we made in God's image, or, using the word loosely, in His likeness? So, this is a very common idea, and it should be among people, that we're made in God's image. It was introduced in Genesis chapter 1, that both male and female were made in God's image. So, first of all, let's dispel the notion that this is not speaking about a physical image. God does not look like us. He doesn't have two nostrils, one mouth, two ears, etc., etc. Why do we say that? Well, there are three reasons that I know of. First of all, many primates look similar to humans, but nobody suggests that primates are made in the image of God. Secondly, God is spirit, according to Jesus, when he's speaking to the Samaritan woman who wants to have a fight about where to worship God, on Mount Gerizim or Mount Moriah, where the temple is. And Jesus says to her, "You're missing the point. God's a spirit, and you must worship him in spirit and in truth," which means that God is not material. And is there any question on that? Because usually...
Yeah, there is. Because my Bible says that God has hands.
Yeah.
In Isaiah 49, it says, "See, I have written your name on the palms of my hands." Always in my mind is a picture of Jerusalem's walls in ruins. So if God has hands, he must have a physical body.
Okay. Well, let me take you up on that and ask you to read Psalm 18, verse 8.
Okay, Psalms 18:8. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flames leaped from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed forth from him.
So what are you going to do with that one, Warren?
Well, that's a very disturbing picture of God.
Yeah, it really goes to the whole wrath experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are many word pictures like this, metaphors, symbolic pictures of God. When it says, my names are written on the palms of his hands, it means every time God looks at his hands, he remembers me. And when David says that smoke pours out of God's nostrils and fire out of his mouth, he sees God as this avenging deity that you better be scared of, because he's going to get you.
Right. And then right next to that, he's also describing him like a mother hen who is gathering her chicks under her wings. So we have a very interesting sort of, depending on what mood I think the writer is in, to what they're describing God to look like or be like.
So these are simply metaphors to describe the actions of God or the behavior, rather than a literal description of God with physical features.
Yeah. It's like the beasts that come out of the sea. One has 4 heads, another one has 10 horns, another one has 7 heads, and then you can have crowns on the heads or crowns on the horns. And these are all symbols pointing to a reality that is not displayed in the symbol.
Okay.
True.
All right. Well, we'll have to take Jesus' word for it that God is spirit, because he's the only one that knew God personally.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that I find that most people are a bit annoyed to find out that they might not ever see God. And yet I've never met anybody who felt a bit upset because they weren't going to see the Holy Spirit. So I think it's just something we have in the back of our minds that gets a bit disturbed when an alternative viewpoint is approached.
Yeah, true enough.
Okay, so I want to say the third reason we don't believe that we're made in a physical image of God is that we are male and female. And so if both male and female are made in God's image, then we're going to end up with the gods of Hinduism, where you have male and female gods on display.
Mm-hmm.
Grotesque for those of us who aren't used to them. So it's clear to me, it might not be to everyone else, is that the likeness or the image bearing is somewhere other than physical.
So in what way do you propose we are made in his image?
Just before we get there, some people say that the fact that we are able to have children makes us in the image of God, because he can create new life.
But animals can have new life.
Yeah. So we're chasing something unique. Nowhere does it suggest that animals are made in God's image.
Yeah.
So we're looking for those characteristics that are unique to man, that we think parallel God. So here's the first one, is that God is love. And this does not mean that God loves part of his creation. It means the essence of God is love. And this love is perceived by creatures in God's unconditional service to them. How do you know that? How did you first discover that your parents loved you? It's because of the way they served you.
Yeah, they provided everything I needed.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the essence of God, is that when Jesus comes, he says, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Jesus gives a description of God in Matthew 5, and I'd like to read this, Warren, Matthew 5, 43 to 47. Matthew 5, 43 to 47.
You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven, for he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different than anyone else? Even the pagans do that.
Thank you. So this picture that Jesus is painting of God is not that God loves. That's true. But it's unconditional. It's
Right.
this unconditional love that defines God.
Yeah. I don't know if this will actually show up, but I just wanted to show a mural from the Good News Tour of Jesus washing the feet of the world leaders. And the first time I saw this, it really took me aback because this thought that God is, on his knees, serving those who have influence in the world. And I don't know, that just, it boggles my mind.
Yeah. I couldn't see whose feet is Jesus washing.
He's washing Barack Obama's feet.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So one of the leaders.
Yeah.
That's a cool picture.
Mm-hmm.
When we love others and pour ourselves into them with no thought of return, we are in God's image.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So a state of being, a way of being.
Yeah. The closest I come to this is a mother loving a child, a little child, newborn child.
Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly what this verse says. You will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven.
Yes.
When you love this way.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just picture now, like, I'm thinking of the unreserved love. Like, I think my nieces and nephews are such a good example of that because, when it's time to go and say goodbye, they just hug me just fiercely. They just wrap their arms around me and they actually give me a real good squeeze. And I'm a big hugger, and so the fact that these little children, without prompting or anything, just give this beautiful love, that is just so unexpected but so precious to me. It does something.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So that's point number one, about being made in God's image. Point number two is that we have freedom of choice. So before I describe this, I want to ask you, do you think God has a choice? Or do you think he's bound by his love so that he doesn't actually have a choice? So pardon me springing this on you, because it's quite a deeply philosophical question.
Well, I think that his love places restraints upon him because but he's free to violate that if he chooses, but he chooses not to because he loves.
Well, that's my point. Because God is love, does God have a choice?
I think if you go back to the analogy of a mother loving a young child, I think for that mother, and of course, I'm thinking of somebody who is of healthy mind and body and all those good things. But I don't think, if we just even look at the stories of what mothers have done in order to protect their child or to keep their child or whatever it is, no bounds. They will walk through fire, they will lift cars, they will, anything. So I think he is bound by just the sheer fact that there's no other possibility in his being.
So what I'm hearing is you saying he doesn't have a choice, like a good mother doesn't have a choice.
Yeah. There's just nothing in there that would be contrary to that.
You're ruining my argument, because I'm trying to tell you we have freedom of choice, and that's how we're in God's image.
But that's the thing. I think that God has the freedom to choose,
I will
but
say to be
chooses
wrong.
not to.
Yeah, good point. Yes. Yes.
So let's just talk about freedom of choice for a minute, and then I'll come back to my confrontational question. Freedom of choice means that we are able to make ethical decisions. Like we can choose a greater good over a lesser good. We can choose what's right over what we know isn't right. This is made possible by the moral integrity that is inborn in humans. Now, I need to unpack that. By moral integrity, we mean that we know there's a wrong way and a right way.
Right.
Moral integrity does not tell you what is right or what is wrong. All moral integrity tells you is there is a right way and there's a wrong way. You have the sense inside of yourself. So where do we get our idea of what is right and what is wrong? Well, we get it from our family of origin. We get it from the society that we grow up in, extended family, friends of the family. We get it from schooling, from church, from social interactions with people. That's where we get our sense of right and wrong from. No, that's where we get our standards of right and wrong.
Right.
So, for instance, if you grew up on an island of cannibals, you would still know that there's a right way to eat your grandmother or a wrong way to do it. But you would not question the idea of eating your grandmother. So if you take criminals, part of the underworld that apparently have no morals, they're quite willing to steal and kill and defame people. And yet they have a code amongst themselves that you don't squeal on your colleague. Now, that's because they have the sense of right and wrong inside of them. But what is right and what is wrong is determined by their environment as gangsters.
Right.
Well, not in the relation of totally in right and wrong, but a story is coming up for me when I was a student missionary in Chuk, and we wanted to go swimming on Sabbath. And for us, we're on an island out in the ocean. It's wonderful. And we were told, no, we can't swim on the Sabbath here. And I remember being pretty chuffed about it. And I remember having a conversation with the pastor one Sabbath, and we were talking about, just different activities and stuff like that. And he was explaining to me that, the reason why they don't swim on Sabbath is because they're fishermen. And so they work all week in the water. And so for them, that day of rest, to not have to go out on the water and fish and all this kind of stuff, it was peaceful to not go there. And so for us to go swimming would bring them feelings of stress, or like that it's work or something like that, right? But it was very interesting, and it totally changed my thinking. And I just was like, oh my goodness, I want to be so respectful of this, and so that they don't feel this anxiousness about needing to work and whatnot. And so, not that it was right or wrong to go swimming, But definitely different translation for a different culture for what was happening there. So I get your point.
Yeah. So let's just talk about animals. Do animals have the freedom of choice? What do you think? I used to have a German Shepherd dog that went everywhere with me. And if a rabbit popped out, my friend, he had no choice. He had to
He
chase
had no
that rabbit,
choice.
you know.
Yeah, there's certain things that are just born into them, right?
Yeah.
It's instinctual, you know.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I could tell, this dog loved me. Why did he love me? I don't know. I fed him, I cared for him, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't have a choice between me and somebody else. And, you know, it's just sort of instinctual that's going on there. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that animals, even though some animals mate for life, you know, swans mate for life, and there's some other animals that do that. This is not godly love. This is instinctual love.
Yeah.
And we have some of that too, but we are called to have godly love, which means that you love the other person at the expense of yourself.
Right.
Yeah, the example that comes to my mind is if I put my dog and my wife in the trunk, only one of them, trunk of my car, and close it, only one of them will be happy to see me when I open it.
Oh, Warren, that was great.
So there's
Oh,
something missing with a dog. They're instinctual to be happy, but they're not thinking it through very well.
you have to tell that analogy to Cheryl. I want to hear her respond to that. That's fabulous. Only one of them will be excited to see me when we get there. Oh, thank you.
Okay, so I've gotten over that now, and so I want to proceed. You know, God could have left Lucifer out of his creation, and we would never have known.
Hmm. Hmm.
But he would have known.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that was a choice that God had.
Yeah.
True.
Now, the more tangible choice that God has, we can see in Gethsemane, where Jesus, who is God, cries out, "Let this cup pass from me." And when he's faced with defending himself physically in the garden, where Peter pulls out his sword and tries to cut off the high priest's servant's head, only manages to cut off his ear. And Jesus says to him, "My kingdom is not of that kind."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then his cry of dereliction on the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Is evidence that Jesus actually thought he was going to die forever, but he chose to do so. Okay, I have one more point that I think makes this concept of being made in God's image reality, and that is the communication skills we have. You know, the ability to sophisticatedly transfer information between human beings is astonishing.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but we are able to communicate emotional feelings to each other. And this is unique on the planet, as far as I can tell. Well, yes, the elephants have a memory and they can rumble information to each other. But when you think that we can actually write down information and can be communicated to people generations hence or from generations previously. There's nothing like this in the animal kingdom, this ability to communicate. And Jesus is called the Word. And God creates our world with his word. You get this thing about being able to communicate, and this communication is so creative that it brings new realities into existence.
Yeah, that and we'll get into the genealogy further in a moment to realize that they lived so long. No wonder they were so wise, because they could transmit information for many, many years more effectively than we can.
So I have two comments to end this. And one is that Paul says in Romans 10, verse 9, that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, then he gives another condition, and then he says, you will be saved. So there's something powerful about bearing witness with your own mouth. And then there's also a reference to this in Revelation 12:17. Sasha, if you can read that, please. Revelation 12:17. This is a well-known verse.
And the dragon was angry at the woman and declared war against the rest of her children, all who keep God's commandments and maintain their testimony for Jesus.
Okay, maintain their testimony to Jesus. See, this is a communication. This is something that they are doing in word and deed.
Can I ask a question here? Because I feel like I'm getting a little bit anxious in my heart for all the people who may not, like in their religion or the way that they worship a deity. What if they don't profess the name of Jesus the way that we know Jesus, but that they believe in a higher power or whatever that looks like for them? I get worried about that for them.
And so you would like to see them have access to salvation?
Yes.
Yes. And now I'm being very confrontational, and I don't apologize. And do you think you are kinder than God?
Definitely not.
So if you can think that thought, God has thought it long before you and acted on it. Are we friends?
Yes. Thank you. That is what the cry of my heart is, that what you have just said.
You have a very tender heart. I appreciate that. So verse 2 of Genesis 5. This is going to take 10 years at this rate, but we'll make it. Warren, if you can read that, verse 2.
He created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them human.
So this is a bit of a conundrum for me. I mean, amoebas make amoebas by just dividing in half. What's all this difference in gender about? So first of all, I'd like to say that having complementary companionship is amazingly interesting.
Yeah.
And dynamic. It's not boring. And we need companionship, and we need it to be stimulating. Children who are not cared for emotionally become dysfunctional. So, there's a huge divide between creatures and their creator. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I once had a book I couldn't read and understand. It was called The Logic of Scientific Discovery by Karl H. Popper. I tried to read that book a dozen times. Eventually, I gave it away because I couldn't understand it. And that was so humiliating for me and humbling. And sometimes I think if I'd met this guy, Carl H. Popper, I couldn't have had a conversation with him because he was just on such a different level. So I wondered about that. If I meet God, will I be gobsmacked? You know, he's just so way above me. I have nothing intelligent to say to him. So I think God made male and female to tell us that we can cross that divide. Because male and female are so very different, but we cross the divide, and when we're not quite sober, we say we live happily ever afterwards. You understand what I'm trying to say? But
For
this
sure.
ability to cross the gender divide tells us and gives us hope that we can cross the, I'm going to use a big word, the ontological divide between God and the creature.
Yeah, I like how you say that, because and immediately right away what came up for me was, well, there are lots of people, who are in same gender relationships, but I'm just picturing now that they were probably also drawn to opposites of each other, and then not necessarily just the same, which would go in line with what you're saying about keeping it very interesting and very stimulating conversation if we see things differently than if we're just all the same.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to verse 21 of this chapter of Begats. And if you can read that, please, Sasha. Verse 21.
When Enoch was 65 years old, he became the father of Methuselah.
So the name Methuselah comes from two roots. Maths, a root that means death, and from shalach, which means to bring or send forth. So the name Methuselah signifies his death shall bring. So now I want you to drop down to verse 26. If you'll read that, Warren, please.
After the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters.
And 27.
Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died.
So Methuselah is the longest lived man or woman that we know of. Now, and I get it. His name means when he dies, it'll happen.
I see. When he dies, it'll happen. Mm-hmm.
So, and he dies in the year of the flood. So it's like God's keeping him alive to prevent this catastrophe from happening.
Wow.
Now, this isn't rocket science, because in Revelation 7, we have a parallel situation. So we're going to go there and read a few verses in Revelation 7.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We're starting in verse 1.
Yep.
Okay. Then I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds, so they did not blow on the earth or sea, or even on any tree.
Verse 2.
And I saw another angel coming up from the east, carrying the seal of the living God, and he shouted to those four winds who had been given power to harm the land and sea, "Wait, don't harm the land or sea or the trees until we have placed the seal of God on the foreheads of his servants."
Okay, so you get it. These four angels are holding back the four winds so that God's people can be sealed. this is a parallel of Methuselah living the longest life that anyone ever lived, so that Noah can get the ark finished and all the animals in and all the people who want to go in for the
Wow.
goats.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Okay, so now I want you to go and read verse 32, please. Verse 32.
In Revelation?
No, Genesis.
Genesis 5.
Yeah, Genesis 5. Thank you.
After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Thank you. And that ends the genealogy of Noah. Now, we have a chart that we can't show on the podcast, but will be visible on the video. There are 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and count them up. There are 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. That's a long chunk of history. But what's fascinating is that we know that some generations were left out by the author so that he got exactly 10, because 10 was a very significant number. Now, why is 10 a significant number? Well, look at your hands and feet. You have 10 fingers and 10 toes. I mean, isn't that impressive?
It is.
And we base the whole metric system on it. And there's some people who don't use the metric system, presumably because they have 12 fingers and 12 toes. So they stick with a foot. Just 12 inches. That's a joke. But I want to show you how important 10 is in the Hebrew culture. There were 10 plagues, 10 commandments, 10 horns on the beasts out of the sea in Daniel 7. The sun moved back 10 steps in Hezekiah's day. Daniel asked for 10 days to prove their diet was superior, and they were found to be 10 times better than the carnivores. There were 10 lepers, 10 bridesmaids, and there are 10 towns in the Decapolis. Israel, as opposed to Judah, consisted of 10 tribes. There were 10 water carts in the temple, 10 tables, 10 lampstands, 10 small basins. The tabernacle was made from 10 curtains, and 10 days later, on the 10th day, is the Day of Atonement. Haman's 10 sons were impaled. Rachel had to stay 10 days before she could go. Laban changed Jacob's wages 10 times. 10 spies brought a bad report. The Ammonites and Moabites and illegitimate people were excluded for 10 generations from the sanctuary. David took 10 loaves of bread and 10 cuts of cheese to his brothers. David left 10 concubines to care for the palace in Absalom's rebellion, and the church of Smyrna suffered for 10 days.
Wow, that is a mouthful.
It is. So can you see that this is a literary format that's being used? That 10 is a sign of completeness. And when you multiply it by 4, which is a symbol of universality, and you get 40, then you get all sorts of 40s showing up in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get 40 days and 40 nights all over the place.
And when we come to the flood, you'll see that the flood actually covered the earth for 12 and a half months, but the author just says the flood was there for 12 months. Just sort of rounds it up, you know. So now I want to talk to you about the chronology of the patriarchs. So if you count up the generations, Adam, Seth, Enos, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. In our way of counting, that's 9 generations. But in the Hebrew way of counting, that's 10, because they count Adam as one generation. We don't count Adam, we start counting at Seth, and we say that Seth is number 1 generation.
Right.
So the flood came after Methuselah, and so it came between the 8th and the 9th generation in Hebrew thinking, and between the 7th and the 8th generation in the way we count. When you come to Shem's genealogy, you have Shem, Arphaxad, and then Luke 3:35 to 36 adds another generation in here, Canaan, which is not in the Genesis account. Then you have Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abraham. Now, what isn't immediately obvious from just looking at that genealogy is that Adam and Abraham were connected by 2 people. Adam died 43 years after Methuselah was born. So Adam and Methuselah knew each other for 43 years.
Yeah.
Now, that's almost half our lifespan.
Right.
That's a long time. And Shem dies 207 years after Abraham is born. So Shem knew Abraham for 207 years.
Wow.
So Adam could have told Methuselah, Methuselah could have told Shem, and Shem could have told Abraham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But when you live a long time, all sorts of interesting things are possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Noah lived 950 years and Adam lived 930 years. So there wasn't any degradation in their lifespan over those 2,000 years between creation and the flood. Now, we say 2,000 years. We're really not sure, because as I've just pointed out, there's a generation put in by Luke that wasn't included by Moses in Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thinking about Noah too, like he had such a mission in front of him. And I was just thinking about that idea of, if you have something that you're working on and it's a big project, you're not going to be thinking about getting old and dying. You're going to be, busy working. And so I think that probably gave him a little extra life in there.
Yeah. Purpose has that way of doing it with you. So there are 2 Lamechs in these first few chapters of Genesis. One is a Lamech in the line of Cain, and he threatens to punish anyone who harms him 77 times. And that is in opposition to God's promise to punish anyone 7 times who harmed Cain. Now, Lamech in the line of Seth lived for 777 years.
Oh, that's great.
You know,
what is that, poetic justice or something?
I don't know, but there's a lot of symbolism going on here.
Yeah.
If I could roll my eyes, I would at this point.
I'm just curious, how do they keep track of all these birthdays? I feel like at some point in time, you can't put enough notches in the tree. I mean, who's keeping really good track of this? How many cakes are we baking?
There you go.
Oh, boy.
Now, according to the record, Shem outlived Abraham by 32 years. Now, what's really curious to me is that's never mentioned. You do the math and that's what you come up with, but it never tells you Abraham had a chat with Shem.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. So where did Shem live? Abraham left and went to the promised land. Where did Shem live?
Mhm.
Yeah. And was Shem perhaps the Melchizedek that Abraham met? You know,
Oh,
there's so little information on all this. Who knows what's
Yeah.
happening?
yeah.
I can only imagine sitting around the fire with any of these patriarchs here and hearing the stories that they would have told. Oh man, boy, that would be good.
So Shem outlived all his descendants up to Abraham except Eber. Like, can you imagine how many kids and grandkids do you have, Warren?
Oh, I have 4 kids and 2, 4, 5 grandkids.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And how old is your oldest grandchild?
Oh, 15.
15. So in 10
Wow.
years, we can safely say you'll have great-grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yes. So imagine outliving these 4 kids, all these grandkids, and all the great-grandchildren except one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Incredible.
yeah.
Wow. Good genes.
So we've talked about it already, the Hebrew way of counting, that Jude says that Enoch was the 7th from Adam. But when you look at it, he's only the 6th generation from Adam in our way of counting. Now, where this becomes relevant is when Jesus says, I'm going to be 3 days. I'm going to be dead for 3 days. We would say 2 days in
Right.
our way of counting. Okay.
Right.
So that's where it becomes important to understand the Hebrew inclusive way of counting.
Everything counts.
That's interesting. Good
Mhm.
comment. Everything counts. We have done one of the most boring chapters in the Bible.
It wasn't boring at all today. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
This is fascinating.
Well, how many people go to sleep reading this chapter? How many people start daydreaming when they're reading this chapter? How many
Good.
people start and just skip to the next chapter? This is really a very boring chapter when you look
Yeah,
at
but
it.
you have mined out so many cool things that I never even knew before about this. Thank you for that.
Hopefully they won't fall asleep while listening to this podcast.
Oh,
So let's pray together. Dear God, we thank you for this record. And we thank you that we are made in your image and we want to be in your likeness too. Thank you for influencing the way we think and feel so that we truly might learn to think like you. We covet that for ourselves, and you have promised us new hearts. We claim that promise together. Amen.
amen.
You can find the recording of our podcast on our website, as well as the PDF document that we've been using, so you can follow along or at least see all the passages. And so that website is rediscoveringgod.ca, and on there is the PDF document, the link for the podcast, as well as our YouTube link. We are now on YouTube. So if you want to see us live, then you can go and watch it on YouTube.
wonderful. And we'd also love to invite you to our Monday evening Zoom discussion where Ian and Warren lead us out. And we are currently going through the podcast where we get to have discussion and really dive in a little deeper and get our most pressing questions answered. It's a really wonderful time of fellowship and connection with the group. We share in community and resources as well. We'd really love to have you join us. We're going to be meeting at 6:30 Mountain Standard Time. You just add in the link 403-506-9201. We'd love to see you.
And if you'd like to connect with us, you can reach us at rediscoveringgod2020@gmail.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you and know how this journey of rediscovering the God that Jesus knew is changing your life. Take care.